So today we have with us Professor Jayashri Kulkarni AM, who will be presenting on the topic Women's Mental Health on this special occasion of International Women's Day. I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Before I introduce our speaker, the Mental Health Foundation Australia proudly celebrates the social, economic, cultural and political achievements of women. On this special occasion of International Women's Day, on the 8th of March, we ask every woman out there to make their mental health a priority. We also ask you to reach out to any women in your life to celebrate them and their achievements. And I'll leave with you a small reminder before we begin that there are no quick fixes for mental health issues, but there are definitely things you can do to find support. It is important to take the time to find what's right for you. There is definitely help available for all women. Our speaker, Jayashri Kulkarni, commenced her appointment as Professor of Psychiatry at the Alfred and Monash University in 2002. She is the founder and director at the Monash Alfred Psychiatry Research Centre, a large group dedicated to discovering new treatments, new understanding and new services for people with a range of mental illnesses. Jayashri Kulkarni graduated in medicine from Monash University in 1981 and became a fellow of the College of Psychiatrists in 1989. She has conducted groundbreaking clinical research since then and is internationally acknowledged as a leader in the field of women's mental health, in particular for her innovative work on reproductive hormones and mental illness. In 2001, in addition to her ongoing academic role, she founded and directs Australia's first women's mental health hospital. Jayashri has received an Order of Australia AM in 2019 for her services in psychiatry. I will now hand over to you, Professor.
Thank you, and to all at the Mental Health Foundation of Australia. I appreciate this opportunity. So I too would like to pay my respects to the Indigenous population, and in particular, I'd like to pay my respects to the women elders and women who are the original Australians, and note that the ownership of the land was never ceded. So again, I do understand some of the traumas that many women have experienced, and in fact some of our solutions might be in turning to our Indigenous population for answers and ways out of some of this. Happy International Women's Day to everyone, and of course it is a day to celebrate achievements by women, and of course it's a celebration by men and women and those who don't identify with either gender. I'm just going to share my screen and then talk about women's mental health, which is something that I have been working in for some time. And in both Australia and around the world, women's mental health is not a global priority, and it really is not good enough. I am encouraged by more recent movements in Australia and overseas to perhaps recognise some of the issues that women are experiencing, and particularly since the pandemic, that women's mental health in particular really took quite a beating in terms of both increasing depression and increasing anxiety. So perhaps in the future, there may be a bit more of prioritisation of women's mental health. We'll go to the well-accepted definitions, and the mental health definition, as the World Health Organization has put forward, is, of course, a state of well-being. That's important. It's not just the absence of mental ill health, but a state of well-being in which every person can recognise and realise their potential and cope with the normal stresses and have a productive and fruitful life with contributions to their community. Mental illness is, on the other hand, a disorder, and it significantly interferes with cognitive, emotional and social abilities, and in fact does include such things as mood disorders, anxiety, eating and so on. When we look at women's mental health, more than ever, it is apparent that women's mental health is actually subject to the cultural effects, the social effects, the psychological, bioneurological, and in the very small bit in the middle, the genetic effects. But I think we often, and particularly in the hurly-burly practice of psychiatry, the social and cultural aspects are often not really considered. And in particular, that is to women's detriment, as I would like to try and explain. When we think about gender differences in mental ill health, what we can think about is women's lives or social theories, which is the environmental or psychosocial or social factors that have an impact on mental health, the women's bodies or biological theories of mental ill health, and the women's personality or psychological theories. And of course, these are in nice little neat boxes, but in actual fact, that's not how it is. It's a combination of all of these factors all at once that determines mental ill health in women. So a woman's mental health is clearly impacted by the social, cultural, traumatic events that lead to then psychological and biological changes. I already mentioned COVID, but in fact there was increasing mental ill health, particularly in women with anxiety and depressive disorders, and increased eating disorders being the front presentations. But again, the rise in alcohol use also in women and of course in men led to other concerns. The impact of the social world in the pandemic, particularly excuse me, during the isolation and lockdown, many women experience domestic violence and increases in domestic violence with the magnified effect of being locked in and locked down in a household with a violent partner, really exacerbated all of the issues that women had been facing. So you can see that with those recent world events, and one can only think about now what is going on for the women in the Ukraine and other parts that are affected by war, that in fact all of the traumatic events and effects are again magnified for women. Thus, the potential for mental ill health in women increases, and that does have an effect on future generations that women still have the responsibility of caring for children. Gender equality in mental health is largely missing, and we do need gender equality urgently. It's really important that, again, the understanding of what women need for their own mental health, that women have equal representation in systems that provide mental health care, or political systems, or financial systems that actually then deliver the budgets and so on for mental health care. All of these factors are really important, and at the moment there isn't an equality. It is also essential overall for that gender equality actually begets economic prosperity, which is good for the whole community. And societies that do value women and men as equal are often safer and healthier. Gender equality is a human right, and on International Women's Day today, I think we need to also remember that it's not just the women who benefit from gender equality, but absolutely everybody in our whole community. The past 5 years of global social context for women is something that I want to discuss. Here are some terrible things that have happened in the past 5 years that have really, really held back the equality and the power basis for women. World leaders such as Donald Trump and all of his comments that are inherently sexist and were given a lot of airplay on the world stage really meant that that significant poor role model was followed by many and held up as the norm, which of course did not help women's equality. We are very concerned about the situation of domestic abuse in Russia. This precedes the current events, but of course, this information came from the Russian Interior Ministry estimates, and the estimate is of increasing domestic abuse in Russia, with 600,000 women victims of domestic abuse being reported every year, 14,000 dying from injuries inflicted by men. There have been changes in the laws in recent times, in 2017, which in fact specified that if a woman presented with injuries that were suspicious, that in fact there have been changes to the legislation to make it very clear that the injuries need to be in different parts of the body. So, for example, if a woman presents with 2 fractured ribs, that is not held as requiring punishment as if she had a fractured rib and a fractured arm. So this kind of pedantic, awful legislation, nitpicking, has really worsened the situation for Russian women. In Ireland, again, I go back in time a bit because I was the president of the International Association for Women's Mental Health between 2017 and 2019, and I'm actively involved in that organisation. But in 2017, we held the World Congress on International Women's Day in Dublin, and the main rationale and reason that we continue to be involved was to help our Irish counterparts in their struggle for reproductive rights for women. Reproductive rights, of course, have a big impact on mental health outcomes. And these are some of the comments that were made by Professor Veronica Keane, who's a psychiatrist in Dublin at Trinity College, who was the convener of that Congress. And, you know, we were the group, the International Association for Women's Mental Health, was very significant in helping to get to the referendum, which then overturned the restrictive situation in Ireland. And so the Irish women do have reproductive rights now. So it's a very important time.
Sorry to interrupt you, Professor. We are not able to see your slides. Were you sharing them?
Yes, I thought I was sharing them. Sorry
about that.
No, very important. Thank you for telling me. I'll reshare. Okay. Can you see that now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. All right. My apologies. So I was talking about the Irish situation and the reproductive rights, and then, of course, moving forward into other countries to look at the international situation for women in Sudan, the true hell of mass rape in Darfur. And it's in my discussions with a war correspondent, the only female war correspondent of the British Times, she made this very salient point. She said, you know, we may talk about weapons of mass destruction, but in fact, the biggest weapon and the most common weapon of mass destruction that is commonly used in conflict throughout the world is rape of women. And she talked about this as something that happened post-World War, in World War II and onwards, particularly in other countries. And so, for example, the mass rape in Darfur is an example of, I think, a weapon of mass destruction, with the terror and horror that it then causes a number of women for a long time. In China, the situation there, the inequality in China and the impacts on women's rights. There was a march in 2015 and a number of activists were involved on International Women's Day. It has gone a bit quiet from our Chinese representatives in the organisation, so I have tried to contact them and I hope all is well. So you might think, well, look at all this, we're talking about other countries, but what is going on in Australia? Well, in Australia, the picture is not great. Women do experience greater instances of sexual abuse and trauma compared to men. As many as 1 in 5 women will be raped during her lifetime, and many more will face other forms of sexual assault, such as unwanted touching or sexualised threats online. And this is problematic about the social attitudes towards women in Australia. Mental illness in women in Australia is soaring. There are, in 2020, an estimated 43% of women, that's 3.5 million, with an experience of mental ill health at some point in her life. 22% of Australian women, compared to 18% of men, have experienced symptoms of a mental disorder during the previous 12 months. The violence against women is perpetuated, unfortunately, in our psychiatric units. And you may be very surprised to learn that in mental health wards in our public system and our private system, that in fact men and women are managed together. And that has been since the 1960s, an idea that psychiatric wards should replicate what happens in the general community, which is that men and women live together. But this is a psychiatric ward that we're talking about. And over time, particularly in the last 20 years, there's been a move towards community psychiatry, which has meant that if you are managed in an inpatient unit, then you are very, very unwell. And also there's a rising usage of illicit substances and street drugs, particularly of the amphetamine group, and that has a disinhibiting effect. So you can see that there are very, very psychotic and disinhibited men and women, but men who then attack women as they are trying to get help in the inpatient units. And there are reported huge numbers of attacks on women, be it sexual, physical or emotional, during the inpatient stay, which is, you will agree, a completely unacceptable situation. This is in Australia and also in most of the Western world, except for Britain, which in 2008 passed a law segregating their wards into male and female wards. So it's not something that we have done yet, even though the Victorian Women's Mental Health Association, which I'm a proud founding member of, put many representations to the Royal Commission, the recent Royal Commission into Mental Health in Victoria, to improve the privacy for women, the safety for women who need inpatient hospitalisation. The recommendations that came out were somewhat watered down, although the spirit and the intent was there. So we're waiting to see what the translation of that will be. Unfortunately, there is an increasing rate of abuse of girls in Australia. So this is early to mid-teenage girls with incidences of maltreatment, sexual abuse, physical violence and/or neglect. The biological, psychological and social impact of that, of course, as you would understand, is long-lasting, with obesity and poor education attainment in girls who are abused in early life, with a great deal of physical ill health and self-harm and rage, all ending in very poor quality of life. Some of the things that we worry about is this precocious sexualisation. So there's a competition called Toddlers and Tiaras, started in the US but has its own Australian equivalent. And this is a 4-year-old girl in this Toddlers and Tiaras competition. You can see that, you know, she has, for example, hair extensions, fake eyelashes, caked on makeup. And this is all very much about making her a sexualized woman, but she's 4 years old. Miley Cyrus, the pop singer who went on to have a great deal of struggle with her mental ill health, at age 9 was similarly precociously sexualized and imitating sexualized adult women at an age when the brain development and other developments, psychological developments, are not actually able in this age group to handle the sexualized object type status. So the issues, of course, with this sort of premature sexualization is an increased link with serious mental health problems like eating disorders, low self-esteem and depression. And it puts girls into danger with a sense of that they're only good because of their bodies, or that's all that they are, is a sexual object. And that can lead quite quickly to exploitation and violence. It does also increase sexism and sexual bias. It's one of the factors, not the only factor, of course, that's involved in, we think, some of the reasons for why mental ill health is particularly bad for women. And I don't think I presented the data to you in a graphic form, but there is twice the amount of depression in women than men, 4 times the amount of anxiety disorders in women than men. This is Australian figures, and 12 times the eating disorders in women than men, and about 18 times the deliberate self-harm. So you can see that there is overall quite a significant increased ratio of mental ill health in women to men. And this, of course, comes with a significant cost, and the cost estimated of depression and anxiety alone, that's not all the other disorders, in women, particularly due to direct lost productivity, is thought to be about $28 billion per year. Now, of course, that doesn't include the cost of treatment, the lost earnings, the cost of the loss of effective parenting of children, divorce and other loss of care of elderly and other factors. So the recent global social context for women's mental health seemed to indicate that there was hope ahead. And I said I was talking about the past 5 years. What we found was, in fact, such things as this: the Me Too movement, which began in Hollywood in 2017, and initially that campaign began as a social media campaign where actresses in Hollywood spoke about their experience of sexual harassment and assault. And when it first came out, you know, a lot of us were quite skeptical and sort of like, oh yes, well, this is about very wealthy white women in the US who have everything really, and you know, so what's going on? But in actual fact, as it happened, what they started was a movement that actually had great significance around the world, and then started to be applied to other workplaces. So not just the privileged workplaces, but many workplaces, the factory floors in a number of countries where women did come forward and say, I too have been harassed and assaulted and will not accept this anymore. And this is not the way forward, or the quiet acceptance of providing sexual favours in order for a job to be given or kept, or promotions, etc. So again, there was a lot that started in a very glamorous place in the world, but continued to take hold in many unglamorous places. And as we found, the ripples from Me Too were everywhere. So the churches, so there was a hashtag #Church2 movement to highlight and stop abuses that happened in church. The education, the Me Too STEM movements, and National Institutes of Health cut funding for anyone who was found guilty of harassment charges. In the finance sectors, the politics and government, this is a military poster from the US, again, trying to make it safer for women in the armed forces. In medicine, and our own Australian Medical Association had several programs about, particularly aimed at younger women doctors, to come forward to talk to their organisations about how to stop the harassment in the health services, the music sector and the military, as I've mentioned. So this was then followed by the Time's Up campaign. And interestingly, here again, you've got some very high-powered, prestigious, wealthy women in Hollywood. And it was founded in January 2018. And it was all about saying, okay, we've raised the awareness about the Me Too movement, and that highlights how prevalent sexual harassment is. But this is now the follow-up, which is to say, enough is enough. It's time to do something. So this was founded in January 2018 with an open letter, in Hollywood, but then followed up in a number of other places, like in the female farm workers sector in the US and other sectors as well. So you can see that there was quite a lot of positivity about the movements that were going on. In the country of my birth, India, which has a dreadful record of sexual harassment against women, or has a very patriarchal society where there are many instances of women not having equality, that in fact there was considerable movement in India to tighten up the harassment laws, and several different manoeuvres to try to decrease the very alarming rape and sexual assault statistics in India. The technology in India was used to bring the Me Too movement there. The Me Too mission, so again, what we had in the social media context was a capacity to see what was going on in other countries. So examples of pictures like this where, you know, the Chinese protests were broadcast in the Me Too movements there. So the hashtag quick sort of grab, the hashtag Me Too, has been important in allowing a number of different events to advocate for sexual equality. I've mentioned before that what happened in 2017 that I was actually really proud to be very much a part of, and many others in the organisation, in particular Professor Helen Herman from Melbourne, and I did a lot of radio interviews, met Irish politicians and diplomats, and we co-wrote and endorsed the Dublin Declaration, which again, we had a UN rapporteur at the meeting, and made a great deal of noise to help our Irish sisters to actually have the reproductive rights. And in the end, as you can see, that whole campaign by the Irish women was successful in overturning the very old and traditionally conservative reproductive rights laws in Ireland. So this is the end result of all of that, and the significant tweet from the Irish Health Minister in December 2018. So the people of Ireland voted to repeal the 8th so that women could be cared for with compassion regarding their particular reproductive rights. So you can see that by 2018, even into early 2019, it felt like gender equality was getting somewhere. Then in late 2019 to 2020, COVID hit and impacted the world, and global social change agendas were overshadowed because, again, everybody was focused on this dreadful pandemic, and as we started to realise there were new horrors for women with the pandemic. Some of the impacts were that across the globe, women had already earned less and saved less money and held less secure jobs because they were more likely to be casual employees. And again, they had, in many places, not a good access to social protections, and often were the majority of single parent households. So when a pandemic hit the economic sector as well, it meant that women were not able to absorb the economic shocks as well as, by and large, men could. So the data showed that, in fact, the recession that happened as a result of the COVID-19 issues ended up being called the Pink Recession because it affected women's incomes and labour force participation in huge ways. The first round of layoffs in many countries, especially the retail sector, hospitality and tourism, really affected women because they are overrepresented in those particular industries. So the numbers of women living in poverty rose. As we know, money is power, and hence the gains in power for women in pre-COVID time has regressed as a result of less economic security for women. In the mental health area, there were many reasons for women to experience more mental ill health. Mental health carers in particular have predominantly been women. This is mothers, usually wives, although, you know, of course, there are some excellent male carers as well, but predominantly we know that women care for their mentally unwell relatives. And this meant that women were in isolation without respite or much support often in dealing with their mentally unwell relatives. For migrant and refugee women during the pandemic and the isolations and the lockdown, the language barrier was heightened, and isolation meant that they could not get cultural community support in many cases, which then led to worse mental ill health for them. Older women in all of our communities really did experience increased health risk from the coronavirus itself, but then as a result also experienced increased anxiety, depression, and the older women were often isolated from extended family supports. And women living in violent households, as I've mentioned, led to increased assaults and deaths during the lockdown periods. So women who already had existing mental health conditions got worse. So I've already stated that in fact women had already had 4 times as much anxiety, twice as much depression as men. And then during the pandemic, all of this exploded and became much, much worse. So all of these conditions, in fact, escalated, and many women are still seeking mental health help for these conditions. So it became the issue of, well, you know, we thought as a group that we were on the right track, and worldwide movements for gender equality were moving forward, but what do we do now? Well, we need to actually keep going to work harder to make sure that women's mental health is not a forgotten issue. There needs to be increased advocacy in all of these sectors. The health sector, of course, we need to up the game in research, clinical practices, and so on. And the mental health sector, of course, we need more research for new thinking, new approaches for women with worsening mental illnesses, to shake it up and look at things differently, look at it through a gender lens. So where to from here? So when I talk about the new approaches, it's very common that there's a buzz phrase which is tailoring approaches, you know, sort of individualizing the approaches of the treatments in any medical condition. And yet what happens when we think about that is that the gender aspects are often not included. And that means that there's many times when women actually don't receive treatments that are tailored for women. And that can actually have terrible consequences. An example of that is even simply looking at drug dosing, for example. So drug dosing, when done in a clinical trials setup, will come out with a new drug having a range of dosing, but it doesn't actually specifically tailor the dose for women. In fact, there isn't usually data that comes out that says, you know, half the population tested for this new drug were women, even though that a lot of the rules in Britain and in the US state that equal women should participate in new drug trials. But it doesn't come out with the statement saying, use this dose in women and use this dose in men. And that often disadvantages women because the standard patient in medicine is still the 70 kilogram man. So we have often a situation where the dose that is being used in a 45 kilogram Asian woman, for example, is the dose that has been trialled and seen to be effective in a 70 kilogram Caucasian male. And that's not going to really end up with the optimal outcome sometimes for the women. So this is an example of it. But what really needs to happen is, I think in mental health, we need a better understanding of violence against women. And many times I shake my head when new young doctors and young health professionals in psychiatry really don't understand or take an important story from the female patient about her early life and other traumas in her life. If they are taken this history, then it's sort of put to one side as, yeah, that happened, but it doesn't actually get integrated into a really good understanding of why this particular woman is presenting with this particular mental ill health condition at this time. So that would be a really important step forward, is to understand the role of trauma, violence against women in the production of mental ill health, which is something that by and large we have overlooked. And I think also, obviously, we need governments and we need a united effort to try to decrease the violence against women and understand that the legislation that's been put into place needs to be heavily enforced and so on. We are seeing more of that, which is a good movement forward. But again, we've still got a way to go. We need to pursue women's health and women's mental health agendas and understand that you just can't lump people all together and say whatever is happening to cause mental ill health in men is going to be the same as in women. They are different, and it helps people generally when you actually think about the gender aspects. We also need to find specific focus treatments for women. For example, the girl who experiences horrible early life neglect or abuse is then programmed, because there are changes in body chemistry and body hormones and brain chemistry and hormones as a result of that trauma. It isn't about just thinking about what happens in the environment. It's the knowledge that what happens in the environment is translated to brain changes, which then has impacts downstream for the rest of her life, unless we can get in there and start to change things around. This is what I meant by new women-focused treatments, because the role of violence has not been thoroughly, or not even very much, researched in mental health in this biological sense. We need to provide more advocacy, safety and privacy and treatment for women with mental ill health. And I'm very pleased, Felicity mentioned it wasn't 2001, it was 2021 that we opened the first ever women's mental health hospital. I wish it was 2001, it should have been, but it took us till 2021 to open the first ever women's mental health hospital, and that's at Cabrini Health in Elstonwick in Melbourne. It is a private mental health facility and it's for women. So it's the first time that we have that, and it was a response to provide a better safety. The white ribbon programs about preventing violence against women are really critical, and we need more in every quarter about this. The gender equality in pay, representation in powerful positions is really critical. And I put there in red proper research in women's mental health. That's really important, because at the moment the research sector is underdone, and women's mental health is not at the top of any research agenda in mental ill health. It really needs a lot more work. The time is right for advances in women's mental health. And in Australia, we've seen some interesting moves in the last year or so. There's some very powerful women advocates who have been speaking up. The Brittany Higgins, Grace Tame interviews, for example, have created a lot of commentary, and they have raised issues in a way that I don't think we've seen particularly raised before. So the momentum is there, but it's important in mental health that we actually give women's mental health a separate voice and platform to understand how we can set up more women-friendly services. We need to understand how we can prevent, understand and manage trauma and its then subsequent role in the development of mental illness. Mother-baby facilities are really needed to be improved and increased, because that's an important way to prevent subsequent mental illness in the women, mothers, but also for the next generation, the babies. And empowerment of women is really an empowerment of the whole community. The amplification of the Me Too movement, I think, is really important in women's mental health, and to take that forward with, punishments and consequences for abusive behaviours wherever they are, and to understand the role of how powerful social media is in creating cultural change in terms of this forward movement. So, my plea on International Women's Day in 2022 is, let's try to make the area of women's mental health a national and a global priority. Thank you very much for your attention.